Did you know that somewhere in Alaska there is a glacier so massive it has its own gravitational pull, subtly altering sea levels measurably around it? Or that beneath a quiet stretch of the Alaskan interior lies a geological structure so strange that scientists are still debating exactly how it formed? You have lived in Alaska, driven its highways, fished its rivers, or watched the northern lights from your own backyard your entire life. But the geography of this state operates on a scale of strangeness, antiquity, and outright impossibility that even lifelong Alaskans have barely begun to understand. Today we are going through 30 geography facts about Alaska that will genuinely surprise even the most knowledgeable local facts about the ice beneath your feet. The land still being born along your coastline, and the forces still actively reshaping this state right now. Fact 30. A glacier in Alaska is heavy enough to measurably bend the planet's gravity field. The Bering Glacier and other large ice masses across southern Alaska possess sufficient mass that satellite gravimetry missions have detected a measurable gravitational anomaly directly associated with their ice volume. As these glaciers lose mass through melting, the local gravitational pull they exert on surrounding ocean water actually decreases, causing sea levels immediately adjacent to the glacier to drop even as global sea levels rise overall. This counterintuitive phenomenon, a melting glacier causing localized sea level fall rather than rise, occurs because the glacier's ice mass had been gravitationally attracting nearby ocean water toward itself, and as that mass disappears, the attractive pull weakens and the water redistributes elsewhere on the planet. Alaska's glaciers are large enough to measurably warp the shape of Earth's gravitational field. Fact 29. Alaska has a crater field that scientists still cannot fully explain. Scattered across the Seward Peninsula in western Alaska are dozens of unusual circular depressions known as thermokarst lake basins. But a specific subset near the village of Wales display geometric regularity and depth characteristics that have generated ongoing scientific debate about whether some originated from buried ice block melting, ancient impact events, or a combination of processes not yet fully understood. Researchers studying the basins have found conflicting evidence at different sites, with some depressions showing clear permafrost thaw signatures, while others display structural characteristics more consistent with subsurface dissolution or impact cratering. The persistent scientific uncertainty surrounding this landscape, despite decades of study, reflects how much of Alaska's geography remains genuinely unresolved even to specialists. Fact 28. Alaska has a town that exists entirely inside a single building. Whittier, a small community on Prince William Sound accessible only by a single-lane tunnel shared with a railway, houses nearly its entire year-round population inside one structure, the Begich Towers, a 14-story former military building converted to apartments, containing the post office, police station, church, and grocery store all under one roof. The geographic reasoning behind this extraordinary concentration is the town's brutal winter climate, with hurricane-force winds and over 20 feet of annual snowfall driven by the narrow fjord topography that funnels storms directly into the settlement, rather than fighting this geography with conventional sprawling infrastructure. The town's residents simply consolidated their entire existence into a single defensible structure, creating one of the most extreme examples of climate-driven urban geography in North America. Fact 27. The geographic center of Alaska sits in a place even most Alaskans could not locate on a map: the precise geographic center of Alaska, accounting for the state's full extent including its outlying Aleutian and Arctic territories, falls in a remote stretch of the interior approximately 60 miles northwest of Mount McKinley Village, far from any town, road, or settlement. The calculation is complicated by Alaska's unusual geography because the state spans such enormous latitude and longitude. And because its boundary technically crosses the 180th meridian into the eastern hemisphere through the western Aleutians, calculating its true geographic center requires accounting for distortions that simply do not apply to any other American state. The result is a center point that sits in trackless wilderness, reachable only by aircraft or weeks of overland travel, embodying the geographic vastness that makes Alaska's center fundamentally different from every other state's. Fact 26. Alaska has a valley where the ground temperature changes by over 100 degrees within a few vertical feet. In the Arctic foothills of the Brooks Range, specific valley locations experience a meteorological phenomenon called temperature inversion, with such extreme intensity that ground-level air can sit dozens of degrees colder than air just a few hundred feet higher on adjacent slopes. During severe winter inversions, cold, dense air pools in valley bottoms while warmer air remains trapped above, creating documented cases where temperatures at valley floor level have registered below -60 degrees Fahrenheit, while temperatures on nearby ridges simultaneously sat above zero. This geographic phenomenon is so pronounced in certain Brooks Range valleys that local wildlife, including Dall sheep, deliberately seek higher elevations during the coldest periods specifically to escape the extreme cold pooling below them. Animals using vertical geography as a survival strategy against a temperature gradient most residents never directly experience. Fact 25. Alaska has an island formed by lava that cooled so quickly it created glass instead of rock. Along sections of the Aleutian volcanic arc, particularly around the more recently active vents near Bogoslav and Kasatoki Islands, volcanic eruptions interacting explosively with seawater have produced extensive deposits of obsidian and volcanic glass material formed when molten lava cools so rapidly upon contact with cold ocean water that the silica within it has no time to crystallize into conventional rock structure. These glass deposits, found scattered across beaches and exposed cliff faces on several Aleutian islands, represent some of the most violently formed geological material in the entire state, created in eruptive events where lava transitioned from over 1,800 degrees Fahrenheit to solid glass within seconds of touching the Bering Sea. The resulting black volcanic glass beaches, found in only a handful of locations statewide, are geologically distinct from anywhere else in Alaska. Fact 24. Alaska has a river delta so enormous that it functions as its own separate climate region. The Kuskokwim River Delta, spreading across the southwestern Alaska coast in a sprawling network of braided channels, tundra, and shallow lakes covering thousands of square miles, generates localized weather patterns measurably distinct from the broader regional climate of western Alaska. The delta's vast flat expanse of standing water and saturated tundra creates persistent fog formation, distinctive wind patterns channeled by the subtle topography of the river's countless distributary channels, and precipitation behavior that meteorologists studying the region treat as a separate forecasting zone from the surrounding coastal and interior climate divisions. This geographic self-containment means residents of delta communities like Bethel experience weather patterns that can differ dramatically from communities just beyond the delta's edge, despite minimal elevation change between them. Fact 23. Alaska has a stretch of coastline where the land is rising fast enough to outpace global sea level rise. While much of Alaska's coastline is eroding and sinking due to permafrost thaw and rising seas, certain sections of the Gulf of Alaska coast, near Glacier Bay and the Yakutat region, are experiencing isostatic rebound, the slow rise of land previously compressed by the weight of Little Ice Age glaciers at rates exceeding 1.5 inches annually, among the fastest land uplift rates measured anywhere on Earth. This uplift is occurring so rapidly that it outpaces the rate of global sea level rise in these specific locations, meaning the relative sea level along this stretch of coast is actually falling even as oceans rise globally. The geographic result is a coastline where new land is visibly emerging from the sea within a single human generation, creating beaches, forests, and usable land where open water existed within living memory. Fact 22. Alaska has a lake whose water comes from three completely different sources that never fully mix. Lake Iliamna in southwestern Alaska, the largest lake entirely within the state and one of the largest in the United States, receives water input from glacial meltwater rivers, groundwater seepage through volcanic bedrock, and direct precipitation runoff from surrounding mountains. Three sources with distinctly different temperature, mineral content, and clarity characteristics that create persistent stratified layers within the lake, rather than uniform mixed water. This geographic complexity produces measurably different water chemistry zones within the same lake basin, a phenomenon limnologists have documented through extensive sampling that reveals the lake behaves less like a single uniform water body and more like several distinct water masses sharing one basin, each retaining characteristics traceable to its specific geographic point of origin. Fact 21. Alaska has a mountain pass that was so geographically vital it determined the outcome of a gold rush. Chilkoot Pass, the narrow and brutally steep route through the coast mountains connecting the Alaska Panhandle to the Yukon interior, was the single geographic bottleneck through which the overwhelming majority of prospectors attempting to reach the Klondike gold fields during the 1897-1898 gold rush were forced to pass. The pass's geography, a 3,525-foot summit, reached via a final pitch so steep that climbers ascended using carved ice steps, known as the Golden Stairs, created a geographic choke point so severe that Canadian authorities required each prospector to haul a full year's supply of goods, roughly 1 ton of material, through the pass in dozens of separate trips before being permitted to continue into Canadian territory. The specific topography of this single mountain pass directly shaped the demographics, mortality, and ultimate outcome of one of the largest mass migrations in North American history. Fact 20. Alaska has a fjord that was completely sealed off by ice and turned into a lake within living memory. Russell Fjord near Yakutat in southeastern Alaska has been temporarily transformed from a marine fjord into a freshwater lake on multiple occasions when the advancing Hubbard Glacier sealed its mouth with an ice dam, most notably in 1986 and again in 2002. During these closures, the trapped seawater gradually freshened as river input diluted the impounded basin, stranding marine mammals including harbor seals and porpoises inside what had become a landlocked lake. Each closure eventually ended in catastrophic failure of the ice dam, releasing the impounded water in a sudden flood. The geographic identity of Russell Fjord Lake has genuinely changed multiple times within recent decades, a rare case of a major water body's fundamental classification shifting back and forth within a single human lifetime. Fact 19. Alaska has a town built entirely on top of permafrost that is actively dissolving beneath it. The community of Newtok on the Ninglik River in western Alaska sits atop permafrost that has been thawing at an accelerating rate for decades, causing the very ground supporting homes, the school, and the airstrip to subside, soften, and in places collapse entirely. The geographic crisis has become severe enough that the entire community is undergoing a complete relocation to a new site called Murtarvik, 9 miles away on more stable bedrock, the first American community to be fully relocated specifically due to permafrost thaw and erosion. The original town site's geography is disappearing not gradually but in observable annual increments, with riverbank erosion claiming dozens of feet of shoreline some years, making Newtok a living case study in how quickly Alaska's frozen foundation can fail. Fact 18. Alaska contains a forest that has been buried and exhumed by volcanic ash multiple times. In the Katmai region near the Valley of 10,000 Smokes, repeated volcanic eruptions throughout the Holocene epoch have buried entire spruce forests under multiple successive layers of ash, only for later erosion to partially re-expose the fossilized remains of these buried woodlands in cutbanks and stream channels. Researchers studying the exposed sediment layers have identified at least 3 distinct buried forest horizons, each representing a forest that grew, matured, and was then entombed by a separate eruptive event centuries or millennia apart. This layered geographic record means the ground beneath the Katmai region contains a stacked sequence of entire ecosystems, each frozen in time by volcanic catastrophe, creating a vertical timeline of forest life and death that is almost unique among North American landscapes. Fact 17. Alaska has a river so cold it can flash freeze objects within minutes during specific atmospheric conditions. In the depths of interior Alaska winter, when ambient air temperatures plunge below -40 degrees Fahrenheit and remain in contact with the partially open, fast-flowing sections of rivers like the Tanana that resist complete freezing due to their current speed, the combination of supercooled water and extreme cold air can cause rapid ice formation on any object introduced to the water's edge within minutes. This phenomenon, related to the same supercooling processes that create fragile fine ice crystals that form throughout the water column rather than only at the surface, has practical and occasionally hazardous implications for anyone working near these open river sections in deep winter, where clothing, equipment, or skin contact with splashed water can result in nearly instantaneous ice formation under the right atmospheric conditions. Fact 16. Alaska has a peninsula where the compass becomes unreliable due to the ground itself. Sections of the Alaska Peninsula near the Aniakchak volcanic caldera contain such concentrated deposits of magnetic iron-bearing volcanic rock that compass readings in the immediate vicinity can be deflected by measurable degrees, creating navigational hazards for anyone relying solely on magnetic instruments in the area. The Aniakchak caldera itself, a 6-mile-wide volcanic crater formed by a catastrophic eruption approximately 3,500 years ago, contains rock formations with sufficiently high magnetite content that early geological survey teams documented significant and repeatable compass deviation while mapping the crater's interior. This localized magnetic anomaly, while less famous than similar phenomena in other parts of the world, represents a genuine geographic hazard in one of the most remote and rarely visited national monuments in the entire United States park system. Fact 15. Alaska has glaciers that are retreating so fast they are revealing 1,000-year-old forests still standing upright. As certain glaciers in south central and southeastern Alaska retreat at accelerating rates, they have begun exposing the preserved remains of ancient forests that were overrun and buried by advancing ice centuries ago, with some stumps and standing trunks found still rooted in their original growing position. Tree ring analysis of these exhumed specimens at sites near the Mendenhall Glacier has dated certain preserved trees to roughly 1,000 years old at the time they were overtaken by ice, meaning the glacier that buried them has only recently retreated past the position it held during a documented warm period nearly a millennium ago. These emerging forests function as natural climate archives, providing direct physical evidence of how far past glacial boundaries have shifted across centuries of advance and retreat that predate any written historical record of the region. Fact 14. Alaska has a stretch of road considered so geographically dangerous that insurance companies have specific policies for it. The Dalton Highway, running 404 miles from the outskirts of Fairbanks to the Arctic Ocean at Deadhorse, traverses terrain so geographically extreme, crossing the Brooks Range, fording numerous unbridged or minimally bridged rivers, and following the Trans-Alaska Pipeline through some of the most remote permafrost terrain in North America, that several insurance carriers maintain entirely separate policy structures specifically addressing vehicle travel on this single road. The highway's geography includes Atigun Pass, the highest highway pass in Alaska at 4,739 feet, where avalanche risk, whiteout conditions, and steep grades combine with the complete absence of cell service or nearby emergency assistance across hundreds of consecutive miles to create a driving environment that the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration has specifically studied as an outlier case in American road geography. Fact 13. Alaska has an island chain where the geography itself creates near-constant fog for months at a time. The Aleutian Islands experience some of the most persistent fog conditions found anywhere on Earth, a direct consequence of the collision between the cold Bering Sea to the north and the comparatively warmer waters of the North Pacific to the south, meeting along the narrow island chain that separates them. This thermal boundary, combined with the island's position directly in the path of the Aleutian low-pressure system that dominates North Pacific weather, produces fog occurring on more than 200 days annually at certain Aleutian locations, with some weather stations recording conditions of reduced visibility for the majority of summer months. This persistent geographic fog phenomenon played a documented strategic role during the World War II Aleutian campaign, where weather conditions caused more military aircraft losses than enemy combat action. Fact 12. Alaska has a lake bed exposed by a vanished glacier that reveals a completely different ancient climate. In portions of the Copper River Basin, where glaciers from the last ice age once dammed massive proglacial lakes, the retreat of ice and subsequent draining of these ancient lake systems has exposed lake bed sediments containing pollen, plant material, and sediment layering that reveal the region supported a significantly different ecosystem roughly 10,000 to 14,000 years ago, including evidence of grassland and steppe vegetation more characteristic of areas much further south. These exposed lakebed deposits function as a geographic time capsule, allowing researchers to reconstruct climate and vegetation conditions across the Copper River region through a period of dramatic environmental transition, providing direct physical evidence of how thoroughly the area's ecosystem has been reorganized since the Ice Age glacial lakes that once covered it disappeared. Fact 11. Alaska has a section of coastline where the tide can expose over a mile of seafloor within hours, along portions of Cook Inlet near Turnagain Arm and Nick Arm. The extreme tidal range exceeding 30 feet combines with the exceptionally gradual slope of the inlet's mudflats to expose vast expanses of seafloor, in some locations over a mile of newly exposed ground, within the hours between high and low tide. This dramatic geographic transformation occurs with such regularity and scale that the exposed mudflats have become both a significant tourist curiosity and a genuine safety hazard, as the fine glacial silt composing the exposed seafloor behaves as quicksand capable of trapping people and vehicles before the rapidly returning tide submerges the flats again. The sheer scale of land temporarily appearing and disappearing twice daily along this stretch of coastline represents one of the most dramatic short-term geographic transformations occurring anywhere in North America. Fact 10. Alaska has a town that exists in two time zones simultaneously due to a historical mapping error. The community of Hyder, in the far southeastern tip of the Alaska Panhandle, sits in such close geographic proximity to the Canadian town of Stewart, British Columbia, that the two settlements function as a single economic and social unit, despite Hyder operating on Pacific time, while the rest of Alaska follows Alaska time, an hour behind. This unusual arrangement exists because Hyder's economy, infrastructure, and even its electrical grid connect more directly to Canada than to the rest of Alaska, a geographic reality created by the town's extreme isolation from the rest of the state and its accessibility only through Canadian territory by road. Residents of Hyder routinely cross an international border multiple times daily without any formal checkpoint, living in a place that is legally American but functionally embedded within Canadian geography. Fact 9. Alaska has a crater lake formed by an explosion larger than any nuclear weapon ever detonated. Aniakchak Crater, the 6-mile-wide caldera on the Alaska Peninsula, was formed by a volcanic eruption approximately 3,500 years ago that released energy estimated to be hundreds of times greater than the largest nuclear weapons ever tested, collapsing the volcano's summit into a massive depression that subsequently filled with rainwater to form Surprise Lake. The caldera's interior remains so geologically active and geographically remote that it receives fewer annual visitors than almost any other unit in the entire national park system, despite containing geothermal features, a breached crater wall through which the lake periodically drains in dramatic floods, and volcanic rock formations of considerable scientific interest that remain understudied, simply due to the extreme difficulty of reaching the site. Fact 8. Alaska has a glacier-fed river system that runs a different color every single day depending on melt conditions. Rivers draining directly from active glaciers across south-central Alaska, including sections of the Matanuska and Knik Rivers, exhibit water coloration that shifts daily and even hourly between milky gray, turquoise, and brown depending on the specific combination of glacial flour concentration, sediment load, and meltwater volume entering the system at any given time. This visible color variation is a direct geographic indicator of glacial activity upstream, with periods of intense melting producing thick, opaque gray water heavy with finely ground rock particles, while periods of reduced melt allow suspended particles to settle and reveal the more striking turquoise coloration associated with glacial flour suspended in clearer water. Long-term residents along these rivers can often estimate upstream glacial conditions simply by observing the water's color on a given day. Fact 7. Alaska has an entire mountain range hidden beneath the ocean that dwarfs anything visible on land. The submerged extension of the Aleutian Range beneath the Bering Sea contains underwater peaks and ridges of greater vertical relief than anything exposed above sea level anywhere in the state. with certain submarine features rising over 12,000 feet from the surrounding seafloor while remaining entirely invisible beneath thousands of feet of ocean water. This hidden underwater mountain geography drives powerful upwelling currents that bring nutrient-rich, deep water to the surface, fueling the extraordinary marine productivity of the Bering Sea fisheries that supply a significant percentage of America's commercial seafood. The mountains responsible for sustaining one of the most economically important fisheries in the country remain completely unseen by virtually everyone whose livelihood depends on them. Fact 6. Alaska has a stretch of tundra where the ground audibly cracks and groans during temperature changes, across portions of the North Slope and interior Alaska tundra. Rapid temperature shifts, particularly the transition from extreme cold to slightly less extreme cold during winter cold snaps, cause the ground itself to contract and crack along polygon-shaped fracture patterns, producing audible booming and groaning sounds that travel across the otherwise silent landscape. This phenomenon, related to the formation of ice wedge polygons that create the distinctive patterned ground visible from aircraft across much of Arctic Alaska, occurs because the frozen ground contracts so rapidly during severe cold that it physically fractures, releasing acoustic energy in a process locals in some North Slope communities have described as the land itself speaking during the coldest nights of winter. Fact 5. Alaska has a glacier valley where wind speeds regularly exceed those of a Category 3 hurricane. Thompson Pass near Valdez in south-central Alaska experiences katabatic winds, dense cold air flowing downhill from the surrounding ice fields under gravity that regularly reach sustained speeds exceeding 100 miles per hour during severe winter storms, comparable to or exceeding the wind speeds of a major hurricane. This wind phenomenon is purely a product of the pass's specific geographic configuration, funneling cold air from the massive Chugach Range ice fields through a narrowing valley that accelerates the airflow to extraordinary velocities by the time it reaches the pass itself. Combined with the area's status as one of the snowiest inhabited locations in North America, Thompson Pass represents a convergence of extreme geographic forces that has made it one of the most consistently hazardous mountain passes for travel anywhere in the state. Fact 4. Alaska has underground ice formations older than the last ice age that are only now being discovered. Massive bodies of buried glacial ice, some confirmed to predate the most recent ice age and persisting beneath insulating layers of soil and vegetation for tens of thousands of years, continue to be discovered across interior and northern Alaska as permafrost thaw and erosion expose previously hidden ice bodies for the first time. These ancient ice deposits, sometimes called fossil ice, represent frozen remnants of glacial systems that existed in configurations dramatically different from anything in the modern landscape, and their unexpected exposure through erosion or construction activity has repeatedly surprised geologists who had no prior indication of their existence at specific sites. The ground beneath significant portions of Alaska continues to reveal genuinely unknown ancient ice formations even today, with new discoveries occurring as the climate that has preserved them for millennia continues to change. Fact 3. Alaska has a geographic point where you can stand in yesterday and tomorrow simultaneously. The Diomede Islands in the Bering Strait, with Russian-owned Big Diomede and American-owned Little Diomede separated by only 2.4 miles of water and bisected by the international date line, create a location where a person on Little Diomede looking across the strait toward Big Diomede is looking approximately 21 hours into the future. Since the two islands sit in different calendar days despite their close physical proximity, This geographic peculiarity means residents of Little Diomede live in one of the only places on the planet where the concept of tomorrow exists as a visible, physically observable location rather than an abstract temporal concept. A daily reality so unusual it has made the islands a recurring subject of fascination for geographers studying the practical human experience of the international dateline. Fact 2. Alaska has a landmass larger than Texas that has never had a permanent road built across it. The vast roadless interior and Arctic regions of Alaska, encompassing an area exceeding the entire size of Texas, contain no permanent connecting road infrastructure whatsoever, with travel between many communities possible only by bushplane, boat, snowmobile, or on foot depending on season. This geographic reality is not the product of insufficient development effort, but rather reflects the genuine engineering impossibility of building permanent roads across terrain combining unstable permafrost, numerous unbridged river systems, and seasonal flooding that would render conventional road construction prohibitively expensive and largely unmaintainable. The scale of this roadless region means that a landmass larger than an entire American state exists essentially outside the conventional road-based transportation network that defines geography in the rest of the country. Fact 1. Alaska is not simply a large state, its geography makes it functionally a separate continent attached to North America by coincidence. No geographic fact about Alaska is more fundamental or more responsible for every fact on this list than the sheer scale of geological, climatic, and biological diversity compressed into a single state boundary. Alaska contains temperate rainforest in the southeast, active volcanic arcs along the Aleutians, the highest peak in North America, Arctic tundra extending to the northernmost edge of the continent, interior boreal forest larger than most countries, and a coastline longer than the rest of the United States combined. This is not simply a large landmass, it is a geographic anomaly so extreme in its internal diversity that no single description, no single climate zone, and no single ecosystem classification can accurately characterize the state as a whole. Alaska is less a state with varied geography and more a continent that happened to be attached to North America by political accident. And even those who have lived here their entire lives are still discovering exactly how true that is. And there you have it, 30 geography facts about Alaska that prove even the most knowledgeable local has only scratched the surface of what this state truly contains. From glaciers heavy enough to bend gravity to forests buried and reborn beneath volcanic ash, to a coastline where land itself is still being created and destroyed in real time, the geography of Alaska is stranger and more extraordinary than anyone raised here has likely ever been told. If a fact on this list genuinely surprised you, drop it in the comments below. Because in Alaska, the land itself is still writing its own story. And nobody, not even the people who call it home, has finished reading it yet.